Good morning. It's Sunday, December 11.
Compass Community Church, exploring faith together. Compass Community Church, exploring faith together.
For the last number of weeks, we've been looking at the 5 love languages, a series of messages that help us really appreciate what love is all about, how great it is to receive the gift of love, and how we also express that in relationships that we have with others. And in this season of Advent and Christmas, we are thinking primarily about God's love for us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. It's what Christmas is all about. And we're seeing how Jesus perfectly and fully embodies the love of God and all of the love languages that we are thinking about for these weeks. We're going to look this morning at the love language of quality time. But before we do that, let's hear this recording from our praise team. So quality time, it's the third love language. So far we've looked at the language of affirming words, recognizing the power of language, the words we speak, words having the power to create realities and to form and sustain all loving relationships. And then last week we looked at acts of service. We know that love involves more than words. We have to show and not just tell. And so we looked at acts of service last week as another very unique and important way of expressing and receiving love. Today, we're thinking about the importance of quality time. It's such an important way that we show love to others and experience the love that others have for us as well. Quality time, that means so much more than just being with somebody, being in the same room as someone else. It's especially challenging, given all of the technology that we live with these days, to have quality time with people. You've probably seen lots of images or pictures of people who are together, a husband and a wife, let's say, who are together in the same room, and both of them are on their phones or some other device. They are together, and yet they're not. They're not engaging in quality time, meaningful conversation. That's what quality time is all about, investing in a relationship, sometimes leaving the regular routines and places that we inhabit to spend time together away from the busyness of life, away from all of our schedules and appointments. Quality time, such an important love language. And as I said, we are thinking about how Jesus perfectly embodies this love language this morning. And there are lots of stories in the Gospels that show how Jesus invested in relationships that he had with others. And we're going to see that this morning again as I read this passage from Mark's Gospel, chapter 6, verse 33, and then reading through verse 44. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5, and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. It's an incredible story. It is the only miracle recorded in all 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's as if the Lord wanted this miracle story to be recorded in every account of his ministry. It's a fascinating story, and we'll get into how it really conveys the time that Jesus invested in people. And I want to begin by looking at how Jesus invested in his relationships with others in 3 ways. First of all, how he invested quality time in his relationship with his disciples. Just that small community of Jesus and his 12 disciples. The first verse that I read with you picks up on a passage earlier in Mark's Gospel where he sent the 12 disciples out on a mission trip. He sent them out to go everywhere, preaching the gospel and healing the sick. They spent some time doing that and come back to Jesus to report on everything that they did. You can imagine how excited they were as one by one they told Jesus about how they taught, how they healed, and all of the incredible results that came as a result of that little mission trip. This must have gone on for some time. There were lots of other people who began to gather around this small group of Jesus and his disciples. It was getting late in the day. They were hungry. And so Jesus says to his disciples, "Let's go away from here. Just you and me. Let's get into a boat. Let's go to a quiet place." You can see how he invested time, quality time, in his relationship with his disciples. It's what we all need to do with our family members, our husbands, our wives, our friends. Get away from the busyness of life sometimes and experience a slower pace, a time when we are away from home perhaps, away from the familiar, away from all of the busy schedules, and just be together, listening, laughing, sharing stories, even quietly being together in each other's company. So Jesus gives a priority here to spending quality time with his disciples. And to get into what that really meant, we need to remember what the relationship between Jesus and his disciples was like. Disciple really means student. That's literally what a disciple is, a student. And when we think of a student, we think of someone who goes to school, beginning at a young age, perhaps advancing to higher levels of education. You go to school, a place that's away from your home perhaps. You learn from many different teachers, lots of different subjects, and then at the end of the day you go home again. You might have homework, lots of assignments to take care of, but school is one piece of your life. That's not the kind of relationship that disciples had with their rabbi in Jesus' day. Being a disciple was being a student in a much bigger way than what we experience as being a student. It was a way of life. You actually lived with your rabbi. You lived together in a community of fellow disciples, all learning from your rabbi, not just learning head knowledge and theory, abstract principles, but you watched your rabbi. You learned from him in the most profound sense of that. You imitated them. You watched them closely. You tried to do what you saw your rabbi doing. And again, that brings to mind this mission trip that Jesus sent his disciples on. What Jesus did, teaching and healing, he wanted them to do. So he sent them out. And even in this miracle story, we can see how Jesus, as he fed the 5,000, did that by investing in his disciples. They did what Jesus told them to do. And so it wasn't just Jesus who fed them, the disciples did. So there was very much a learning that was practical, lived out. To be a disciple was to make that your whole life. You learned from your master, imitated him. And so this is where the investment of quality time takes on a whole new meaning for the relationship between Jesus and his disciples. Yes, they spent some time away from the busyness, just with themselves, quality time in that context, but the time that the rabbi invested in his disciples went much more than that, much deeper than that. It wasn't just a part of their life, it was their life. And so we can see in that structure, that relationship, how being a disciple of Jesus today is still very much the same thing. And I'll get into that in a little while. How it's not just something detached from all of the other things we do. Being a disciple, an apprentice of Jesus, is our whole way of life. And Jesus invests in us to make that happen still today. And then let's see how this quality time investment expands to much more than just the relationship Jesus had with his disciples. He spends quality time with thousands of people, literally, as he looks at this crowd with compassion, with love. He invested in this crowd of people who were hurting, who were hungry. As he said, they were like sheep without a shepherd. The disciples wanted Jesus to just get rid of them. These people presented a problem. They were an annoyance. It was getting late. Lord, send them away. Jesus would have none of that. He took time to be with them, to feed them. And his compassion on this crowd of people indicates how he wanted to spend as much time with them as possible. It's really amazing how intricate and detailed the feeding of these 5,000 people really was. He gives instructions to his disciples, how the people are to be seated in small groups, 50 and 100. He distributes the bread and the fish. It's like a little worship service where he takes the bread, he thanks his Father for the bread and the fish, he distributes it. After the miracle is finished, all of the leftover pieces are gathered up. And even as the disciples are sent away after the miracle, Jesus stays behind to dismiss the crowd. He invests time in saying goodbye to these people. What an incredible gift of time he invested in them. And this really shows us how spending quality time with people is fundamentally, and this is why it's a love language, focused on their needs, what they enjoy doing. Have you ever spent quality time with someone, a spouse or a friend, doing something they enjoy? It's not something you like that much, but it's something you're doing because you know they enjoy it. That's quality time. That's sacrificial time. It's an investment on your part. I remember hearing a man talk some years ago about how he brought his son along with him on a fishing trip. He used to go with friends on a fishing trip once a year, and when his son got old enough to accompany them, he thought, I'll bring my son along. I think he'll enjoy it. And for many years, his son joined the company of these older men on a fishing trip. His father thought he enjoyed being there, but there came a point in one of these sessions, one of these getaways, where the son, who was a young adult at this point, said, Dad, I really don't like fishing. His father was surprised. He thought all these years he was enjoying being with him and the others on this fishing expedition. But no, he said, I really don't like fishing. I've gone all along because I know it's what you like to do, and I don't want to disappoint you. And his father was surprised, but also very touched, because he knew that he was coming alongside of him because he knew it's what his Father enjoyed. That's quality time. That's the gift and investment of time that blesses and enriches others. Jesus has done this most powerfully, of course. When you think of the sacrifice of quality time, you think about what he has invested in us through his suffering and his dying. I'm sure as I read this passage about him feeding the 5,000, how he took the bread, thanked God, his Father, for it, and broke it. You think of the Last Supper that he had with his disciples, a meal that we still participate in through the Lord's Supper in church today, a meal that remembers and celebrates what Jesus has done for us, the sacrifice of his life, the tearing apart of his body, the pouring out of his blood. This is the greatest investment of time, his time, and his sacrifice in our lives today. It is the center of our life. It is our life. Just like the disciples and their rabbi enjoyed that relationship, this is not something distinct or detached from everything else we do. It is our life. And when we experience the power of the Lord's investment in that way, his life-giving presence in our lives still today, then we know how important it is for us to enjoy quality time with him so that he can nurture that life that is ours by his sacrificial giving. And that brings me to the third part of how quality time is present in this passage. Jesus spent quality time with his disciples. He spent it with the thousands as he was present with them in their need and miraculously fed them. And then do you notice that after the miracle is complete, Jesus goes away by himself to pray. He goes on the side of a mountain to pray to his Father. This is quality time that he invested in his fundamental primary relationship, the one he had with his Abba, his Father. Quality time, just Jesus and the Heavenly Father. If he needed to do that, then certainly we need to do that as well. And again, it's not in any detached way where we do our devotions and then we carry on with our lives. It's not like the old hymn puts it, take time to be holy. It's like you just live your life and then every once in a while you practice holiness. No, it's not like that at all. It's investing time in a relationship that's not a piece of your life, but is your life. There is no separation of being spiritual, being a student or an apprentice of Jesus, and all of the other things that we do. And so this is a really fascinating piece of this story. And as we think about quality time, we think about the time Jesus invested in nurturing his relationship with his Father, in prayer, in quiet solitude. It's so important that we do that we ground ourselves in the life that God has given us in Jesus Christ. It's what Christmas is really all about, how God is present with us through Jesus, his Son, the one who has given himself to us and whose life is our life. And as we spend time nurturing that relationship, investing quality time in our relationship with the Lord, we are led to a greater appreciation of what it means to be a student of Jesus still today, an apprentice. We still are in the business of doing kingdom work today, showing the world who the Lord Jesus is, how he continues to look at us today with compassion, with love. He wants you to be his disciple, his apprentice. He knows how much we mess it up, how we are always struggling to try and imitate him. But he's with us. He invests time, his life in us, so that we can follow him better and show the world what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It's what Compass Community Church is all about, to show the world the way to the Lord, to have others, perhaps even you watching this video, come alongside of us as we explore faith together in a community of disciples, apprentices who are trying to follow the ways of our Master. I hope that this video has given you encouragement and has reminded you of how important it is to experience quality time, not only with our family members, our spouses, our friends, but with the Lord most fundamentally. We'd love to hear from you about what that looks like in your life. If you have questions about who the Lord is and what being a disciple and an apprentice of Jesus is like, email us, office@compasschurchstrathroy.ca. It's a way of connecting with us and a way that we hope we will help you connect with the Lord. Thanks so much for watching this video. Be well and be blessed.
Compass Community Church.